Marwo iyo mudanayaal, dhalinyaro dhammaantiinba soo dhawaada. I just said mothers and men and women and others and youth, welcome. And I am very honored to moderate this event. I have really, had, especially in my undergrad years, a background in community work, and it's wonderful to see now in full circle. Now we are in a level of addressing this issue again. So for me, it's really coming back. So let me address the two main speakers of this event. Sadia Jama is a volunteer with the Canadian Somali Mothers Association and an active community organizer working on issues relating to poverty and health inequities. She's also a community-based researcher and a data analyst at the Social Planning Council of Ottawa, and a doctoral candidate in epidemiology at the University of Ottawa. The Canadian Somali Mothers Association, CSMA, is an award-winning volunteer-run advocacy group founded by Somali mothers in response to the disproportionate incarceration of young men of color. Our next speaker is Abdi Jan, has an extensive experience in Canadian and international development work. As an experienced nonprofit management executive, Abdi has more than 22 years of experience in poverty alleviation, community economic development, project management, capacity building, organizational development. Abdi is currently working with United Way, East Ontario, as director, capacity building since 2010, and is leading United for All. United for All is comprised of a growing list of local organizations that have come together to address the issues of hate, violence, and extremism in Ottawa. I am very pleased to welcome both the speakers and the rest of you in this wonderful event. And using the order of the introduction, I would like to introduce Sadia to address the panel first. And I actually don't have exactly how much each speaker is supposed to speak, but Blair maybe can help me on that. But we'll discuss about later, maybe in the chat, but welcome, Sadia, please. Yes, there's a new message for me, yes. Go ahead. Yes, each one has 20 minutes. Thank you, Blair. That's my savior. Thank you. So each speaker has 20 minutes and Sadia goes first. Yes.
Thanks so much, Amina. So unfortunately, I'm not able to use my camera today. Apologies. I know it's not exactly ideal, but hopefully I won't sound like a voice coming from nowhere. So I'm pleased to be part of this discussion tonight. The way that I'm structuring my presentation today will be that I will first present some findings of a report on the state of racialized and Black communities in Ottawa to give a sense of the context. I work at a nonprofit that crunched the numbers behind the report with generous funding from the United Way, which Avid works for. So he'll recognize a lot of this. So after presenting just the state of affairs in Ottawa, with respect to some indicators, not a lot, I'll share the work of the Mothers Group as it speaks to the picture that I'll be presenting and the work that they do to support racialized and Black communities in the city. So I'll share my presentation. If everyone could just wait a little bit. Okay, perfect. So I think I've shared it. Does everybody see what I see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so before I kind of dive into the actual report, I'll talk a little bit about the data sources so that folks can understand where I'm getting the data from. The data sources are from the 2016 census, data complements of a program called the Ottawa Community Data Consortium. It's a data portal designed to facilitate community level action, and data from a data product that the Social Planning Council of Ottawa, along with with partners, including the City United Way, have produced by the name of the Neighborhood Equity Index, which is a mapping, data, and knowledge sharing tool developed to illuminate neighborhood level inequities in Ottawa. I'll share the links of the data consortium, the equity index in the chat for any folks who want to visit after the talk. And I'll also share my email if people are interested in learning more and having access to the data consortium. Okay, great. So one of the main takeaways that will hopefully will be obvious and likely not surprise anyone is that we have significant disparities in our city, most of which fall along racial lines, with the Black community being hit the hardest. When we look at economic disparities, racialized communities are 2 times more likely to be living below the poverty line and experiencing unemployment relative to the general population. The disparate outcomes hold when we break down or disaggregate and look at poverty at the poverty level for women, seniors, and children. Also, when we look at the occupation profiles of racialized and lower income communities, actually, before I kind of just get to that slide, if you look at the slide and you look at the racialized community population in Ottawa and the Black population in Ottawa, you see kind of with respect to the general population, you can see the disparities are quite stark. And this is incredibly concerning since according to census data, about half of the Black population here in our city are children and youth. So this speaks to intergenerational poverty, ongoing oppression.
Can I say, Nadia, there is an echo in your presentation. Maybe there is something going on. Someone doesn't have their microphone off. So yeah, now it's all out. Now it's good.
Okay, sounds good. And then when we look at the occupation profiles of racialized in the Black community in Ottawa, we find even greater concentration in lower paid work, sales and service occupations, and even within what would appear to be higher paid work, like health occupations. Other data sources show a concentration in lower paid end of health work, like personal support worker positions, which in addition to having other implications with respect to income in the context of the pandemic, as I'm sure we all know, come with additional risk. With respect to housing, the pattern continues with racialized populations more likely to experience what is called core housing need. That is living in housing that requires major repairs, that does not have enough bedrooms for residents, and that is unaffordable. The Black community in particular is 3 times more likely to live in the 10 least equitable neighborhoods using our neighborhood equity index, where residents live on low incomes, are more likely to experience unemployment, less likely to complete post-secondary, have a greater likelihood of experiencing poor physical and mental health, and have a greater likelihood of experiencing crime against the person. So here's some stark contrasts. So I'm actually kind of speaking faster than I'm presenting these slides. So I'll go to the next one. Here are some stark contrasts at the neighborhood level, where the least equitable neighborhoods, which are disproportionately racialized, are contrasted with Ottawa's most affluent neighborhoods, along, again, disparate outcomes along socioeconomics, like unemployment and income from work. So in this case, the unemployment being, so this is average, right? 26%, while next to nothing, well, nothing in many of the well-off communities in Ottawa. And then even if you look at income within communities, so if you look at some of our 10 most inequitable neighborhoods in Ottawa, and you look at racialization, you still see a huge gap with respect to income and various other indicators that I'm not presenting here. And that also continues within more wealthier neighborhoods. This pattern continues with health, with the least equitable neighborhoods experiencing considerably more health inequities than the more affluent neighborhoods in Ottawa. And so here 90% is the prevalence rate or the rate in the 20 most inequitable neighborhoods in Ottawa, compared to, well, nothing in other neighborhoods. Again, the same thing for emergency department visits related to mental health and substance use. There's still a stark contrast with 0 in other neighborhoods in Ottawa. And so the general picture that I'm painting here really only gets at the surface of the experiences that racialized people are facing in Ottawa. When we look at health, income, employment, you can just imagine it. And when you crunch the numbers, you start to see a really depressing story where significant parts of our community here in Ottawa are not getting opportunities, are experiencing poor health, preventable suffering, and lack of access in various areas, whether it's education, access to care, healthcare, etc. And so I guess what I'm going to be speaking to now is the work that the Mothers Group is doing. But I think sometimes when we talk about these issues, we tend to not look at it at a systemic level and a structural level, and understand that these issues touch all parts of people's lives. And when the news presents it, it's a particular incident or a particular situation. But a lot has happened to get to that point, to get so that someone is having a mental health crisis situation because they weren't able to access the supports they needed, and they lived in situations and in conditions that were unhealthy and didn't ensure their well-being. And so the Canadian Somali Mothers Association started out as a group of Somali mothers who came together to support each other as they navigate the justice system. So there are some articles online that you can search, but really the beginning of the group was such that one of the mothers, her son was imprisoned, and she didn't have really anywhere to go, any support. Many of the mainstream support services weren't very helpful to her. And she ended up having to just try to figure out how to support her son and her family through this experience. And as a result of doing that, has been able to gain access or create resources that then, as you know, word tends to go around, others hear about, they came to her quite secretly to get support from her. And she really was faced with the challenge of supporting a lot of people who weren't getting the support they needed within mainstream services, and also dealing with issues around shame, around how we make people that we make invisible in these institutions, the way they disappear from our communities, how their families struggle, and are also dealing with, the shame that they experience because of the way the community in general, in the small community, but in broader, and in society, in the broader Ottawa community, but in society in general, the way we label certain people. So in her just analysis of all of this, felt it very important to bring this discussion, to socialize this discussion, to bring the community and the mothers together, to normalize talking about these issues. And then the Mothers Group kind of organically came to exist. The Mothers Group is no longer just a support group for families with loved ones who are incarcerated, but now has kind of grown into a small nonprofit that does advocacy on behalf of racialized lower-income communities in Ottawa. The CSMA continues to provide direct services to families with incarcerated loved ones across Canada. So they're doing a lot of hard work with next to no funding, as many community groups do, providing what really services that mainstream services should be providing, calling different prisons across the country, trying to connect families with their loved one, which are often, these structures are designed in such a way that they're meant to break communication lines. And doing all of this along with other work that they do, which is advocating for families and people who are incarcerated. Here, they do quite a bit of work at the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center, where they advocated for a position, a liaison position with the community. They were really successful in getting it. And so now that position is held by an elder in the community who works at the detention center full time and who provides support to racialized people in the detention center. And it works actively with the mothers group to provide support. They provide several hundred prayer mats every year, connect people with support services in the community, advocate in mainstream support services like John Howard Society for more inclusive services. A lot of these nonprofits, there are incredible gaps when it comes to racialized communities. And often it seems that that is intentional. And so that the mothers group really does quite a bit of advocacy in advocating for inclusive services, but also in getting racialized people into these services, which is, they're often rejected. And so they often have to, write letters of support, have meetings, advocate for people just to access the services that other people
Final 5 minutes.
access.
Final 5
Sure.
minutes.
And so at this point, this is where my presentation comes full circle. The mothers group recognizes that justice work needs to happen at all levels for equity to be realized, and as such are working on projects that provide opportunities for economic development and transitional support services and housing for racialized people specifically. So services that are designed, implemented, provided to racialized communities, particularly those who have come into contact with the justice system or their loved ones have and are returning into the community. They're particularly interested in addressing racism in the school system as well, and have come to know that the first signs really of concern often start with how our young people are treated in schools. And of course, with the ongoing pandemic, the mothers group is also advocating and fighting for the safety and health of all people, right, in our communities, but in particularly within the detention center and in prisons across the country who are at increased risk for exposure to the virus and are also distributing resources in the community. That's about it for me.
Thank you. And you're right on time. You even have 2 minutes to spare. Good job. Congratulations.
Okay, I'll take it.
Good job. And you're on time.
Thanks.
And, our next speaker.
Thanks, Amina. I'll try to be, I'm as well, try to manage it within 20 minutes. I'll try to connect the dots, but first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Shayobi.
Okay, yes. Okay.
Yeah, and Dr. Blair and the team for organizing this event, because this is critical, one, to respond to the denial of systemic racism, but at the same time to make people aware of the need for action, right? So what I would do is I'll focus my 20 minutes on providing a global context, and then talk about the state of inequity here in Ottawa, which Sadia provided a bit of information about that as well.
Mhm.
And then what's the way forward? What do we need to do, and what are we currently doing, right?
Mhm.
So for the global context, I'll begin with my journey in life. There was back in Pakistan.
Mhm.
And the reason that I'm trying to do that is that I'm not an expert in Canadian history. But what I can do is I can provide you some facts for your comparative assessment so that you can see whether there is systemic racism and discrimination here in Canada or not, right? So when I was going to school, a very long time ago, I was going to school and I was first learning how to write an application, for sick leave application to the teacher. So that was my first awareness, I would say, or introduction to the colonialism. So the colonialists were gone back in 1947. I was learning how to write an application in 1971. And what we were taught is that the way you begin the application was, I beg to state, right? So you begin begging right from the get-go. And then when you finish the application, there you say that your most obedient servant, right? So I was young, but I kept thinking, right, that why are we saying that we are servants? We are students, right? So why should I tell my teacher that we are your servants? So there was the beginning of it, but it took me a while. Like I was probably towards the end of my high school when it dawned on me that there was actually there was just one tool that was used among many tools by the colonialists, and those tools were employed to break the free spirit of local indigenous population, right? So interestingly, and at that time, when that slave mindset was being inculcated, right? The colonialist occupation had ended about 25 years ago. We were an independent country. We were not a dominion anymore, right? But the problem was that the tools and policies and procedures and practices that the colonialists employed to benefit the loyalists and to subjugate the rest of the population, those were still being practiced, because those who were loyalists, they were given land, they were given positions, systems and structures were established in a way that they would support those loyalists and not the general population. But if you think about the disparity and inequity, the consequences of that, so that colonialist legacy continued until still most of the laws are still those laws. But for the first time ever that we had an independent, totally independent prime minister through an election, that was just 3-4 years ago, right? So imagine, right? So this is just to give you an idea that that's a country where the colonialism came to an end, when we're calling ourselves an independent country, right? But compare that to Canada, we had no residential schools. We had no segregation of Black population, no separate schools and all those kinds of things, right? So those things were not there. But the disparity, the inequity, and the systems, the structures that the colonialists established are still to this date undermining the human rights and everything in that particular country, right? So now compare that to Canada. So I'll just leave it to your imagination that who in his right mind would be able to claim that we don't have any systemic racism, whereas we had the residential school in operation until mid-90s, where I was just recently reading, so where Black students were not allowed to go to medical school in Kingston up to 1965, and those regulations were on books until 2018, until 2 years ago, right? And you tell me that there is no system, right? All right, so I'll continue. So fast forward to 2002 when I came to Canada.
Mhm.
And before that, I was involved with the UN agencies working on poverty alleviation, human rights, and all those kinds of things. So when I came to Canada, I thought that I won't be able to get a job, find a job in my field of expertise, because in Canada, I thought that everyone was equal. There was equal opportunities, respect of human rights, and all those kinds of things, right? So I won't have any job here in Canada. But soon, when I got a temporary position at Southeast Community Health and Resource Center, there I found, and I was given a very small project, a $6,000 project that United Way had funded, and I had to work with 4 or 5 low-income neighborhoods, the OCH properties. And that was the beginning of my introduction to Canada and the disparity in Canada. But this is a learning that started way back in 2004, and now it's 2021, and I'm still learning. And I'll just take you on that particular journey so that you could understand my learning, and that would hopefully help you understand the issue here as well. So 2004, I started working in those neighborhoods, and immediately it dawned on me that there were some serious challenges that the community was facing. But what we could do at the most to distill down the issues, the disparity in the neighborhoods, right? So there are neighborhoods in the city where the average income is half of the city average, right? Where the unemployment rate is 12% compared to 2% elsewhere in the city, right? Where the high school completion rate is just 60% compared to 93% elsewhere in the city, right? So we, like, when I say we means that the health and resource centers, the Ottawa Police, the City of Ottawa, Ottawa Community Housing, you just name all those partners, right? The social service agencies, youth service agencies. So collectively, our conclusion was that to address this seriousness, so the issue was crime and violence and all those kinds of social issues in those particular neighborhoods. So our conclusion was that if we do collaboration, coordination, leveraging of resources and community participation, those things would help us change the conditions. And of course, those things, those initiatives in those areas did help us bring some change, what we call social development, crime prevention through social development. But if, and I used to think to myself, right, on the one hand, we are saying that the root causes for this disparity is unemployment, lack of education, health inequity, and all those kinds of things. But on the other hand, our intervention is only focused on community cohesion within those community neighborhoods, right? So this is not a full solution to the issue. And then, so fast forward from 2005 to 2017, I encouraged Social Planning Council and the City of Ottawa to partner with United Way to develop us what we call Neighborhood Equity Index, so that we could systematically do analysis of all the neighborhoods in town and prepare an index that which are the worst neighborhoods in town in terms of 5 key domains, which are social, political, economic, and health, etc. So within like doing assessment there and rank the neighborhoods so that when we do the intervention, we have a clear idea what we actually need to change. And then we are able to do that specific type of assessment, data assessment after 5 or 10 years again, and see where we can change the resources, change the focus, and move on to other neighborhoods and other areas as well. So that was the whole idea. But then thanks to the movement in US as a result of the murder of George Floyd, that gave us an opportunity. So we had the index was complete. We were able to say that these are the top most vulnerable neighborhoods in the city where we need to invest some resources. But then that movement, the Black Lives Matter movement in US and here in Canada, that gave us an opportunity to look into the data from a totally different perspective, that how is this disparity actually affecting racialized communities, Blacks and others. So the portrait of a Black community that Sadia presented before me, I won't go into the statistical details, but that was the result of looking at data from that particular perspective. And that opened up our eyes. So I'm again, going back to 2002 and 2003, 4, 5, when we were working on those initiatives, No Community Left Behind and Community Development Framework, collectively. And when I compare the results, of course, we transformed some of those communities, but why could not we sustain the change, or why could not we make a deeper impact? The reason was that we were not addressing the root causes of the disparity in those neighborhoods. Who in the world can imagine that you will be putting 79% of your city's low-income people in a few neighborhoods and then expect that there's some miracle would happen and their lives would be transformed? So that's one thing. But the other thing is that that on the one hand you have, so what we have actually, what we call the disparity and inequity, these are the implications, these are the consequences of the systemic discrimination and the structures that were established, which are to this date, which are propagating or perpetuating the inequity, right? So if you don't address those things at the system level, you don't change those structures, working at the community level, the work that we are doing, that would be just band-aid solutions, and we won't be able to address anything. So this work is going hand in hand with the other work that we started in 2016, the United for All, and that was the result of hate crime, the increase in hate crime in Ottawa, and that's when the mayor and the chief and Yasser Naqvi, Alex Munter, those community leaders approached United Way to find out if there was any coalition, any partnership, any alliance of organizations working on the issues of diversity and inclusion and anti-hate, etc., so that they could put their weight behind that in that alliance or collective and make some change. We did go out, we looked around, did our homework, but we couldn't find any collective initiative as an alliance like that could that we could target for working and also engaging the champions with us. So started working on bringing the key stakeholders together, from social services, from faith community, from human rights organizations, from anti-racism groups. And it took us about a good chunk of time, like about 2.5 years, so that we could come up with a solid mission and vision to address a common goal of addressing hate and violence and racism and systemic racism in Ottawa to begin with, and the regions now we are working. So it took us a while to come up with a two-pronged approach, the intervention and the prevention approach. So strategically, that's the approach. Structure-wise, we have a coalition of more than 100 organizations. We have a rapid response committee that addresses that responds to any hate crime incident in Ottawa immediately. Work closely with the police and other agencies, and also we have a table of champions, where we have councillors and the mayor and other champions that we have, and we have gone through several consultations so far. As a result of that, we have identified 10 key areas for intervention, for action. And within those areas, we are also working to find out programs and activities, but that work is going to be the community level work. At the same time, we will require to focus on the system level changes that would be required to go hand in hand with that community engagement and community education and awareness work. And for that, we'll be engaging our table of champions and other partners. So that's what we have to date. We have United for All in place. The strategic plan is ready. We are currently waiting for some resources from the government and other sources so that we could launch our programs. Meanwhile, we are strengthening our backbone function at United Way to provide support and communication, research, capacity building, and other things, particularly developing a research partnership between Carleton and Ottawa, so that Ottawa U, so that we could develop a shared measurement system so that we could measure our progress across the regions, and hope to bring some serious change in the community. So this would go hand in hand with the economic response that we are trying to develop to build an equitable and anti-racist recovery economy, which will strengthen the communities and enable ordinary people to support themselves with dignity. So, but all this work, like although it spans over a period of almost 17, 18 years, but to me, this is just a first step that we at least were able to link it, whatever the challenges and the issues that we were facing, to link those issues to the need for a system level, systemic and structural change. So based on that, I'm thinking that we still have a long way to go. And I dutifully and obediently lived my life as a good second-class citizen in Pakistan, true to what I was taught in my elementary school to be the most obedient servant. But I sincerely hope that my children and your children don't have to continue to live this systemic inequity and discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abid. Thank you so much. And you saved quite a bit of time. And this is wonderful because now we have more time for discussion. I love all this clapping hands. Since I'm the moderator, I will follow Blair's guidance. I still hear microphones that are on. So with Blair, I will say, please, everybody turn the mic off. This, I hear some echoes because we are recording for this, just for the quality of sharing, because this recording will be shared later. So let's make it the best. If I am correct, I am not expected to make a commentary. I'm supposed to open the floor, but I will interject myself and say, what a wonderful presentation, both by Sadia and by Abid. And I personally can remember this whole kind of like symbolic obedience, you know, and this, you know, why are we, you know, still obedient? I mean, I remember when I was growing up in Somalia, it was actually quite common. Those of you who know Arabic, Damin, you know, the word Damin, you know, people who are not very good. The Damin from a rich family used to go to Oxford and those universities because they got money, you know, because public universities were free, but only the smart could make it. So we knew our local universities were advanced, but yet families who have their children, you know, went to foreign university usually get the better jobs. So, I mean, we just know this whole thing in a multiple levels. And I agree, our children and their children should never suffer, you know, this kind of diffusionism and colonialism that's still with us. Having said that, the protocols is that people post their questions on the chat and that I read the question, whether it's directed to both presenters or it is directed to a specific presenter. And also I was told not to read the name of the person who posed the question. So I will abide that. So I will now, I'm just now watching the chat and waiting for the questions to arrive.
Okay, real quickly. So are we not to ask the question if we can?
Please, the questions are to be posted on the chat.
Yes. Thank you.
If they wanted to talk, I mean, they don't.
Yes, Blair. Yeah. If they want to, because that's what I thought it was supposed to be.
Only those who want to remain anonymous.
Now you got it. Now, see, Jude, forgive me. So those who don't want their name to be identified, they can post it on the chat and I can read it. Those who want to post a question, they can do it. See, I always have a backup. Blair is always there. Please, June, you go ahead.
Okay. Hi, and thank you to both presenters. This first question is to, I believe, I can't pronounce his name. Yeah. How did you know? The gentleman.
That's Abid.
Abid. Okay. I believe I have the same mindset with with him. with the colonialism, their logic and their notions, and how it still resonates today. And I am struggling right now with being a part of a community. What does that look like to me is what I'm dealing with. But it's the band-aiding. It's the idea that there's a dominant group of or society, an institutionalized type of system that is dysfunctional, that speaks and purports the words such as democracy and multiculturalism. While that is the problem,
Can you pose it as a question, June?
yes,
Pose
the
it as a
question is, how do I participate in civil democracy when I'm not still considered a human being that can do this?
Wonderful. Abid. Yes, now you're on.
Thanks, June. So I personally believe that we have a daunting task ahead of us, and we shouldn't limit ourselves to what we are seeing, mere protests or issues, statements of condemnation, and not actually engaging in doing a proper analysis of where actually, what are the roots of that inequity and discrimination, right? So for instance, if the head of the police association says that there is no systemic racism, right? He is right in the sense that there are no guidelines there for the police to go out and socially profile or the black and all those kinds of things, right? So those types of instructions are not there. But then the thing is that how does it actually happen, right? So the more we do research, the more we identify those areas where the roots of disparity and discrimination lies, and then bring them to the fore, do advocacy around them for policy changes and system level changes. That would be the way out. Without bringing those structural changes, nothing will happen. I'm thinking that collaboration and partnership that we have established, like more than 100 organizations and United for All. So our voice is the community's voice, right? So those kinds of initiatives would definitely be able to make our voices heard. And that's my strong belief, right? So, but we have to start, and we have to go beyond the mere condemnation and protests.
Okay, I'm going to reach out to you because I'm struggling with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, June, and thank you, Abid. Next question. Don't be shy. Here is a question, a chat question to Abid. How has the city consulted? How has the city consulted with radicalized groups in developing the new master plan? I'm going to repeat this. How has the city consulted with radicalized groups in developing the new master plan? I always don't like the word master plan, but I guess there is a master plan in here. But this is a question that is directed about master plans, which I assume is a new action plan, but I don't know if there is a master plan in what you're doing. But there is a question that just came out in the chat.
No, I'm trying to figure out, is it radicalized communities or racialized communities?
It says, how has the city consulted with radicalized groups in developing the new master plan, with a question mark? There was a typo, racialized groups.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's why I was confused.
Now the corrections can, this whole chat things can be really very complicated.
So we
racialized groups, yes.
So we are working very, very closely with our counterparts at the city, the Anti-Racism Secretariat, and we're helping them organize different community consultations. So the process is just starting, and we are trying to engage as many groups and as many communities as possible. So whether they are faith communities, whether they are racialized communities, so that process is just starting. So even our next United for All coalition meeting on the 25th, we'll have a good chunk of time for consultation with the community. So from that perspective, I'm sitting on the planning committee. So I'm confident that we'll hopefully cover all the racialized communities. But if there are any, I've been receiving some messages as well, like some school teachers approach me and they wanted to have consultations with the youth as well. So if there is any group that feels that they are not included, then we'll definitely take care of that as well.
Good. Nothing else in the chat. So please come in. We still have time. We have a half an hour to brainstorm.
I have another question. Now, the first presenter spoke about
That's Sadia Jama. Yes.
Yeah, Sadi, yes. Spoke about interracial racism, and my concern is the ongoingness. It continues. Watching children at 7 years old get shackled. So how do we, because, you know, not also are we struggling, it's endemic of all of this. I'm also looking at how do we, the onus always seems to fall on us being responsible. So from a neoliberalistic mindset, we are held responsible. And as
so the question is, how do we address this issue, no?
yes, with all these different attacks coming at us.
Okay, Sadia, come in. The question is directed to Sadia Jama directly.
I guess my perspective is I don't have a lot of faith in working within the system, quote unquote, the system. I think, you know, we often professionalize this type of work and we leave communities behind. And just from my experience within Ottawa, a lot of communities are kind of struggling on their own, and there are bodies and committees and groups within the structure that is advocating for their needs, but in fact, there's a real disconnect when it comes to communities. And I question really how well they're being included. And so my response to what I'm hearing from you, June, is that I think we need to look for solutions. We need to figure out our own solutions, and we need to work in community, and we need to be in neighborhoods physically, mentally, and come together and work together and find resilience together and develop solutions that work for us and bring it to these structures and these institutions and these bodies, you know, with some real, and bring it to these bodies, not in a way where we're kind of asking for someone who oftentimes is self-appointed to represent us, but to really have, you know, transformative dialogue and to really have community dialogue. And I'm not seeing that in our city.
But real quickly, not to interrupt, but do you also think, that being said, which I absolutely agree with, the other side of that for us is to understand that many of us might be hurt. These positions require not only the resistance and the cultivating of our own, but that many of us will be challenged and may be hurt. I think that too is important in the grand scheme of things. The sacrifices.
Thank you, June.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, right? Like,
carry on the response, because we have two more questions. So the chat is already building up, but please, Sadia, just wrap this one up, and then I will. There is a common question that I feel can be addressed both, but I think maybe more directed toward Abid. And there is a second question. So I have now two questions hanging in the chat. So complete your thoughts, Sadi, first.
Yeah, June, I completely agree with you. I think this is incredibly hard work and the stakes are high for a lot of us. And this is why we need to do it in community and together and support each other in all ways, and resist the way that the way that society has agreed that we interact with these institutions and with people who speak for us, quote unquote, speak for us, right? And so for me, it's all about community work. It's grassroots work. It's building strength and power in our communities so that we build we develop our own solutions and we support each other.
Wonderful. This is a question is probably addressed to both of you, so I think you can take turns. With Ottawa's unique situation being the capital city of Canada, how does the organization of these initiatives influence policy that affects the whole country? So Abid maybe can take
Yeah,
the
so
lead,
it's a
then
very
Sadi can go over it. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And as I mentioned, right, like we have to work on two fronts, one at the community level, the other one at the system level. So this comes under the system level change and advocacy work. So the system that we have so far identified or the process or procedure is that we will work at the community level, try to work with the researchers, identify solutions, system level changes, do advocacy at the community level as much as we can do, and then we engage a champions table to work with different levels of government and put forward our recommendations and put their weight behind it. So that's the mechanism that we have thought so far.
Wonderful. Before I go to the next chat question, Blair is always the one who keeps me honest. I didn't realize that actually Reem has their hand out. So I wait for the next chat question. Go ahead, Reem.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so
my eyes not on the chat, but everywhere. It's crazy. Yes.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, clearly.
Perfect, perfect. So my name is Reem, and I just like to thank everyone for giving the presentations today. So I've had classes with June, so I think her sentiment is kind of aligning with mine during Black History Month, which is unfortunately the sense of hopelessness, because I think back and I'm like, okay, we went to the George Floyd protest, men were being lynched in 2020. It's kind of like a hard reality to grasp with. So I think when you deal with the narrative of policy and advocacy work can challenge the dehumanization of racialized communities, it's a bit tough. So just kind of aligned with June's question, it's like on a spiritual level, on a more emotional level, how do you maintain that sense of hope? Because I remember being in the crowds of the protests of the demonstrations at the George Floyd murder, and the Imam kind of ended off with saying, like, the Quran ends with, Muhammad asked for everyone to come together from wherever part of the world you are. Again, I'm not Muslim, so this is paraphrasing, but that kind of, it did something for me, because I kind of questioned, when is that going to happen? Because they also said, like, our future generations won't have to do this. And I'm like, is that easy though? Like, how is this really going to look like? So my question is just more about hope, and how do we maintain that on a more emotional and spiritual level? Yeah, so thank you.
So I'll just respond to this in line with the other question that's there, that why does it seem that we are the ones wanting to make this change, right? So like, again, the reason that it took us about almost 3 years to bring everyone on the same page, so was that there are some serious misconceptions and misunderstanding there out in the community. So when we went out back in 2016 and 17, most of the social service agencies, for instance, would say that we don't have anything to do with this. There are human rights organizations that should be dealing with it. There are ethnic organizations that should be dealing. There are faith organizations, or police should be dealing with them. And then we just continued the conversation. So one was that misunderstanding, misperception between different key stakeholders. But the other one was the gap between these different sectors, like the faith organizations are working in total isolation from the social service sector. So in the social service sector, we have plenty of expertise, whether that's facilitation or community engagement or advocacy or whatever, which the faith communities or the human rights organizations can benefit, but they're all of them are working in their respective silos, and they couldn't see that their work was connected. So, and the reason that it took us such a long time was to sit with them individually and go through everything. You are doing this, so within this work, if you shift the focus a little bit, you can speak to this. Like, for instance, if there was a course on diversity already being offered by a group of agencies already, why can't we incorporate some of the other components in that education and awareness work? So it took us a while, but now I believe that those who are part of the movement that we have created is that it's very diverse. It's not one group. It has groups which are working on anti-Semitism, groups which are working on Islamophobia, groups which are working on anti-Black racism, decolonization, etc. But the good thing is that now we are learning from each other's experience and leveraging each other's strengths. So the change is gradually happening, but all that we need to do is, again, like so far, this is happening, again, speaking from the hope perspective, and that's why I'm hopeful that I've seen people who were completely resistant to an idea or kind of completely in denial that they have any role to play in this particular movement. They have come full circle, and they're part of the movement. But what I'm thinking is that we need to start the action. So we have done quite a bit of action planning, but now we have to do into that action mode and start delivering those programs and activities that we have planned. Our major limitation is resources at the moment. We are trying to bring as much resources as possible for those community level initiatives to take root. So I'm hopeful from that perspective, and from the perspective of the senior level community leaders that we have engaged, from the organizational leaders like the chief of police and the mayor and others, to the frontline staff and then community activists. So that gives me hope, and hopefully that will bring the change that we want to see in the community.
Sadia, do you want to add something?
Sure. I think I will just say that I think we have to remember, while the time that we're living in is we have a lot of struggles, and the work continues, and it goes into the past, into the present, right? But the work of equity and of justice work has been happening since forever. And we've come a long way, and to pull kind of hope and strength from past successes, but also to remember that you're not doing this, on your own, that hopefully you're doing it in community with other people, and that you're also ensuring that you find joy in it. Because I think, was it like Toni Morrison, I'll probably kill it, but she said something along the lines of, we often get distracted because we're always on the defense, and we're always talking about how we're not this or how we're not that, and we lose ourselves, right? And our joy and the things that fulfill us. And if that is this work, then that's wonderful. You're part of a long line of people doing this work, and bringing us that much closer to justice. But also remember to find joy, to find your community, to do it in community, and to remember that this will likely go on, and that you have to find your place in it, and what contribution you can give.
Next question comes from chat, and it is addressed to either presenter or to says everyone, which means probably other people can chip in. For Sadia, as someone who isn't originally from Ottawa, but has tried to be involved with groups like CPEP and OPDC, how do you suggest getting further involved with the community on the ground?
So yeah, I think both of those groups actually are actively looking for volunteers and are probably desperate for it. CPEP probably not as much, but there's quite a bit of, not as much activity as other cities, granted, but there is quite a bit of activity in our city. And so please feel free to reach out to me. I'll connect you with people that I know who are doing this work. And then trust me, there's a lot you can do. And the groups that you identified and others would love your support.
Another chat question that is, how do we address some structures and thoughts with the challenges of defund the police? I like that question. So I guess both of you can address this issue. How do we still address the defund the police? There is another chat question, but this one is really very important.
So the defund the police question is very interesting. For me, what the police is a representation of the community and the overall society and structure, right? So I was watching that TV show with my kids, the N with an E something. And so in that, I saw the police, not the police, but the police of that time, the way they were treating the Aboriginal people and the way they were guarding. And so that's the evolution of the police in this country, right? So that's how they, so for me, that was the beginning of the police institution. So, and in itself, when I think about the policing or the enforcement, all those terminology in themselves are like they don't make much sense to me, at least, right? And I was at the police college for a training long time ago, 2006. So on their what's inscribed on the walls there, the basic principles of policing, the community policing, I was thinking that if the policing was exactly like as I'm seeing here, then we won't have any issue at all, right? We would just love it working with it, but that's not the case, right? So where does that mindset comes from, which leads to the reality that we are seeing, right? And what could be the solution? So I'm thinking that, again, for that, what we need to be doing is that it's not that that they are inside the tent and we are outside the tent and we are shouting and protesting, but we are together with them in bringing that and making that change happen, right? So if we work together, then hopefully we'll be able to make a huge difference, and particularly with people like our present chief, Chief Slowly, and other allies within the police, working with us to make those changes within the police and out in the community happen. So that's the way forward to me, and I still strongly believe that that those who are out there in the community, like for instance the guy who killed 6 people in the Quebec mosque, and his only regret was that he couldn't kill more, right? So if you have that type of a mindset, so whether you go to the police or whether you go to the military or you become a public representative, you are bringing that mindset. So we need to address the root, the causes, and what actually help them develop that type of mindsets, and what structures and systems are supporting and nurturing that. And if you could do that, then we will be able to make some lasting changes.
Wonderful. I have first, let me ask Sadia to add something. If otherwise, I have questions lining up here, but there's one really burning. But Sadia, do you want to add like last minute to something about defund the police? As you know, it's Black Lives Matter. Defund the police is one of the key. It's one of the key decolonization aspect. I mean, I just saw this what happened in like a few days ago. This 9-year-old girl in somewhere in the States. It just scares me. What? How can a 9-year-old girl, be handcuffed and all that, but seems to be never ending. So do you want to add something to from your end?
Sure. I just think that there is some really great work happening on the ground, incredible, very publicly too, with the Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition, and their calls for what defund the police should look like, right? Because people understand that differently. And so I'd encourage people to kind of look at the work that's happening and to support it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. So here is a very important, because again, the media is very important. So this question says, how do you evaluate? And here I assume it's for both speakers. How do you evaluate the media / journalism coverage of these disparities and community engagement? Where can they improve? Thank you very much. I assume this is a person who is either a journalist or interested in improving the situation from the point of view of the media and journalism.
So thanks so much, Amina. So I'll thank this person who posted this question. This is a very important question, and working with the media is one of the topmost priorities for us. But what I would say is that I don't blame the media for not being aware of these disparities the way we have found out recently, because if we working in the sector, working with the community, trying to address all those social problems and all those inequities and disparities, if we couldn't figure it out, like I'm giving you my example, working with all the key stakeholders for the past 15 years, like if it took us that long to figure it out, and again, I'm thanking the movement that started with George Floyd's murder in US. So we had the NEI, the Neighborhood Equity Index, but we had absolutely no clue to look at that particular index again from the race perspective, from the colonial legacy perspective. So now that we have that, I believe that it's our responsibility to work with the media, educate them that what's the situation actually, what are the root causes, and how this is actually linked to that colonial legacy, right? That's where the roots of this lies, and then what they can do to make change happen. So from my experience working with the media, we were the one providing media all the context and the information, and media was a big help in bringing lasting changes, transformational changes in some of those low-income communities where crime and drugs and gangs and all those kinds of issues existed. I'm thinking that they can play a bigger role now that we are trying to address the root causes of things, and we know the reasons, and we know the actions. So again, before I put the responsibility on the media, I put the responsibility on us, the social workers and the people in the academia, to make the media aware of all these, the information that we have, the data that we have, and the actions that we have identified for moving forward.
Wonderful. Before I go to the next question, unless Sadia want to add something, I have to combine the hand up, and also I think this screen only shows one half of the screen, so I have to go back and forth and check. But Hasta, am I saying your name correctly?
Hi, my name is Hasti. Very nice to meet you all.
Very pleased. Yes.
I have a question for whoever can actually answer my question. I've been thinking about this question for a very long time, and I don't seem to find an answer for it. I feel like I come from a place where there was a lot of protest, not generally to racism issue, but just a lot of protests. I wanted to know, what can we do for our children to learn about, like, most of the cultures around the world? Obviously, we don't know all of them, but most of the cultures around the world, and for them to actually realize that at the end of the day, we're all the same. And at the end, we're all going to the same place. That can be under the ground, that can be anywhere that we're basically going after this life.
So the question you would like to ask is
that how can we teach our children that?
For tolerance. I assume this is what you're advocating for, to respect others. Yeah, that's the million question. So this is, I assume, as this question is question of pedagogy. You know, how do we teach, you know, pedagogically people, you know, I think this is what also where this is part of like decolonizing only, not only the material, but also decolonizing the minds, decolonizing language, there's a whole bunch of things. So here, I think this question is maybe connected with journalism as well, but education. So I wonder if Sadia will start with this and say, you know, how should you address questions of teaching against hate, against animosity, against, you know, hatred toward others, against fear. I mean, is it a part of community education that is a part of your action plan in terms of fighting all this poverty and stuff? Is there also a community engagement in terms of reaching out to others and demystifying, you know, certain mythologies about what the immigrants are? At least I'm familiar with Toronto. There are all kinds of myths about Somali immigrants. I know that, you know, you mentioned Dixon, and then people will have all kinds of ideas about what Dixon represents. So Sadia, do you want to start with this question?
Sure. You're certainly not going to find it in schools. And there's a reason that we get the education that we get so that we can continue to be good little citizens in our society and not really understand these, you know, the structural inequities at play and the narratives that we tell about other people and their histories. And so I guess what I would say to you is that you'll have to first do that education yourself. There's certainly a lot of information out there, especially now. I think you'll just have to kind of sift through it and find it, and, you know, unlearn a lot of what we're taught, and then be able to pass that on to your children. But I think just in terms of the journalism, I know, like, I'm in epidemiology and we do a lot of COVID research right now. And even just the way that the stories we're telling about this pandemic and the people that we're blaming, for instance, racialized communities, and even in research, the way that we publish research and we call higher rates of this virus in quote unquote ethnic areas, concentrated in ethnic neighborhoods. So a lot of this is not surprising. And so I would encourage you to really, you know, be aware of where you're getting your information and to make an effort to get information from alternative sources.
Wonderful. Dominic, would you like to ask your question, or may I invite Dominic Marshall to ask your question? No?
Yes, thank you. Dominique, I'm a historian at Carleton. I had two things that I would like to hear about if you have something to say. One of it is, how do you think about how special Ottawa is compared to Toronto or other places? How do you address the fact that Ottawa has its own characteristics? And the other thing is, where do you take, maybe you could give one example each, where do you take your main inspiration for the best ways to do the kind of community work you're doing? Are there places or community associations elsewhere that are really doing stuff that you find admirable and you'd like to borrow or you have borrowed? Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Dominique. These are good questions. I'll just quickly refer to all those questions that begin with how. I've posted my email address there. So we, after very, very, very thorough consultations for more than a year, came up with this a list of 10 action areas or strategy areas, which would address many of the questions that how do we do this, and particularly the question that Hasti asked. But coming to Dominique's question about the difference between Toronto and Ottawa. So there's a huge difference, of course. So what we did was, when we were starting the work on the Neighborhood Equity Index, we actually borrowed that idea from Toronto. And Toronto actually implemented that way back in 2005 and 6. And it took me a while. It took me about 6-7 years to convince Social Planning Council and the city of Ottawa to work with us so that we, to learn from their experience. So we went to Toronto, we learned from their experience, and they have borrowed the tool from World Health Organization, and they have implemented that in 10 other cities in, or more than that, globally, right? So learning from that experience, that was one thing, but then coming back and we organized an advisory group, and we met for about a year with several subgroups looking into all those key domains for social and social, political, economic, health, and all those domains. And within that, the different dynamics. So we specifically focused on the changes or differences from between Toronto and Ottawa. So the index was specifically designed based on the specific characteristics of Ottawa. And now that we have developed that additional layer of analyzing the same data from the racial lens, and how racialized communities are affected, that makes it very unique compared to Toronto. And we're trying to improve it further, right? And that's reflected in our work moving forward. So this is very Ottawa specific, and now we are expanding it to the regions as well, which we believe we're working with United Way Canada now, because there's an organization in BC which has already started adopting our approach. So we are working with United Way Canada to see that how can we replicate this initiative throughout Canada. That's one. But number two, we are looking into different aspects of our work, the capacity building aspect of our work, the community programming aspect of our work, and the advocacy and system level changes aspect of our work. And for each of those areas, we do best practice research as much as we can. One of the researchers that we have engaged so far is Jean-Francois from Ottawa U, and we have started working with Dr. Shayubi as well. So hopefully, if you could strengthen that partnership, that will give us more opportunity to not only do some best practice research, but also to develop some local level tools and shared measurement systems so that we could measure the change over time as well.
Sade, you want to add something? I like the how question, you know, Dominic is a historian, so it's like how this came about. So yes, so yes.
Sure,
Sade.
and I think it's just finding where you can make where you can contribute. So particularly for me, it's in the area of research and within public health and epidemiology, and challenging just the dominant narratives in your particular areas of work, and bringing forward work that really is meaningful and makes a difference in people's lives. Like in some of our COVID research that we're doing, we've had to challenge a lot of the language that's being used during the pandemic to paint communities as somehow the threat for this pandemic, as well as to do research and work with communities, alongside communities, in a collaborative way where they drive, you know, they drive the work and they bring the solutions that make sense to them. And so that really, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is I think we're often looking to figure out where to kind of make a difference, but it starts where you're at, and doing work that's critical in whatever work that you're doing, in collaboration with communities and people, so that, you know, we're working towards equity from all fronts.
So we're approaching with the final 3 minutes are here. There is a video which I consider to be YouTube about COVID-19. And there's an addition. I don't think it's an actual question. It's a more like a commentary. Pay attention to the date and the companies that participated. I assume this is in reference to the video, and to see the topics that were brought up through the, including targeting minority demographics. I think maybe Sadia, who is, if I'm correct, a PhD candidate in epidemiology, is best situated to address those concerns, because those concerns have histories. You know, race and medicine and biology have always been the root of colonialism, at least the most fundamentally. So maybe this concluding question, you might want to just address as kind of commentary about these issues, you know, community that feel vulnerable to these issues.
So you're absolutely right. There's a history here. And in fact, the way the fallout of this pandemic is not surprising. When we look at SARS or past pandemics, the way that this has occurred and the patterns that we see are very much predictable and intentional. And so none of our decision makers really, honestly, should be surprised. And that it really just kind of illuminated the inequities that already exist in our society and the fault lines and the peoples that we're okay with basically thinking that are disposable. And so there is some really interesting work starting to happen around this type of research in a very critical way, challenging even here in Canada, the way that we write about the pandemic, the disproportionate exposure and risk that various communities have are not inherent to them, but in fact, it was designed so that they would be vulnerable in this way, and that they would be disproportionately exposed to the virus in this way, and that they would not have as much protections. And so thank you for bringing this to light. It's unfortunate, I think, especially when we look at the resources in our particular city. There's a lot of good work, but when we look at the way that vulnerabilities are structured and the response of the government, I'm not one to believe that they don't know. I think what we're missing here in our city, and if we compare to other cities like in Toronto, which is a working class city, that has a lot more grassroots activity, a lot more community building, transparency and accountability. A lot of these community groups keep these institutions and these community bodies and various organizations accountable. We don't have that in Ottawa as much. And so I always come back to building strength in communities so that we can challenge the language, the narrative, the stories that are being told about us, and that we push back against the professionalization of activism and the ways in which we're being spoken for. And that work starts at the ground for me.
So we come to the end of this wonderful event, and I think unless someone has something to add, I think I want to move over to Blair, because the event ends at 7:30 if I'm correct.
That's right, Amina. Great. Well, I've learned from my colleagues and good friends in Duco Tiono and our late and great colleague Pius Adefami that we should do a vote of thanks like they do in Nigeria to show our appreciation for our fantastic speakers. Sadia and Abid, I learned tremendously from you both and the great work you're doing, and thanks so much for the resources. And I know myself, and I'm sure a lot of us will be following up with you and these resources to get more involved and to learn from the great wisdom and and passion you both have brought to the important work you're doing with so many others. And I also want to warmly thank Amina for a fantastic job at moderating, keeping us all on the toes. And of course, thank you everyone for all the great questions and the passion. And of course, many of you I know, because you're very active and involved in the city as well. So keep up the excellent work, and yeah, definitely important to keep pushing forward and with others. So thank you everyone, and this is I feel delighted. This is a fantastic first Community Voices event for the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Carleton, and we look forward to both future events and of course seeing you on the street. So thank you.